Nobody ever remembered Ilara's name on the first try. She had worked inside Blackridge Manor for 6 years, and in all that time, the nobles who lived there had called her Girl, you there, and once, memorably, the small one who smells like soap. She was 22 years old. She woke up before sunrise every single morning. She scrubbed floors, carried trays, pressed linens, and moved through the grand halls of the estate the way a shadow moves, present but unnoticed, there and gone. She did not mind, or at least, she had told herself that for so long that the two things had started to feel the same. On the morning that everything changed, Ilara was on her knees in the great entrance hall, scrubbing the marble floor before the rest of the estate woke up. The water in her bucket was cold. Her hands were red from it. Outside, the sky was the dark blue that comes just before dawn, and the only sounds in the hall were her brush and her breathing. She had just finished a long section near the far doors when she heard the heels. She knew those heels. Everyone in the manor knew them. Duchess Seraphine Holt walked as though every floor in the world had been built specifically for her to walk on, and she had a way of arriving in a room that made everyone in it aware, all at once, that she was the most important person there. She was 25 years old, the daughter of the most powerful family in the pack next to the king himself, and she was extraordinarily beautiful in the way that certain people are beautiful, with an awareness of it built into every movement. She passed through the section of floor that Ilara had just finished. Her heels left small, muddy marks across the clean marble. She did not stop. She did not look down. She said, without breaking her stride, "Missed a spot." The two women walking with her laughed. Ilara looked at the marks on the floor. Then she picked up her brush and started again. She did not say anything. She had learned, a long time ago, that saying something cost more than it was ever worth, when you had no power to back your words up. The annual Court of Allegiance was held twice a year inside the great throne chamber of Blackridge Manor. Every ranked member of the pack attended. They dressed in their finest clothes and stood in rows and pledged their loyalty to the Alpha King, and the King's Wolf acknowledged each of them in turn. It was an old tradition, and an important one, and it was taken very seriously by everyone who participated in it. Servants did not participate. They stood at the walls, or managed the refreshment tables in the side corridors, and they stayed quiet and out of the way. Ilara had been assigned to the left corridor. She stood behind a long table with pitchers of water and small glasses, and a bowl of fruit that no one was going to eat, and she watched the ceremony through the tall archway that separated the corridor from the main chamber. She had watched this ceremony 4 times. She knew the order of it by heart. She watched without particular interest, the way you watch something you have seen many times, aware of it, but not really seeing it. Then King Kaelan Dre walked into the room, and the air changed. Ilara had seen the king before, in the same way that she had seen the high ceiling of the throne chamber, often, from a distance, without ever expecting it to look back at her. He was 28 years old, and he had been the Alpha King for 3 years, since his father passed the crown to him on his deathbed. He was tall and serious, and moved with the particular stillness of someone who had learned not to waste energy on things that did not matter. He had not smiled in public, as far as anyone in the manor could remember, in a very long time. He walked to the center of the chamber, and the ceremony began. Ilara turned back to her table. She straightened the glasses. She refilled a pitcher from a smaller jug behind the table. She was not watching when it happened, which meant she felt it before she saw it. A sudden, complete quiet in the room that was different from the formal quiet of the ceremony. A held breath kind of quiet. She looked up. The king had stopped moving. He was standing in the middle of the floor, and he was looking at the left corridor archway. He was looking, with an expression she had never seen on anyone's face before, certain and startled at the same time, like a man who has just found something he had stopped believing he would ever find, directly at Ilara. She looked behind her. There was no one else there. She looked back. He had already turned away. The ceremony continued. Nobody moved. But the king's beta, a broad-shouldered man named Garrett who had known Kaelan since they were boys, caught Ilara's eye across the room with an expression that she could not read. And Duchess Seraphine, who was standing 3 feet from the king in a gold gown that had cost more than Ilara made in a year, had turned very slightly and was looking at the left corridor with eyes that were narrow and very, very still. 2 days later, Ilara was given a new assignment. The late queen's private library, A room at the end of the East Wing that had been locked since the Queen's passing 3 years ago was finally to be catalogued. The head housekeeper, a stout woman named Mrs. Carr, who had managed the manor staff for 15 years and who spoke to Alara the way one speaks to furniture, had chosen her for the task because, as she put it, "You can at least read, which is more than I can say for the others." Alara was given a key and a notebook and sent down the east corridor alone. The room smelled of old paper and dried flowers, and something underneath both of those things that she could not name, something that felt, strangely, familiar. The shelves were full, journals, mostly, bound in dark leather with small gold clasps, dozens of them. She began at the left wall and worked her way right, opening each one just far enough to read the date on the first page and record it in her notebook. She did not read them. She was not supposed to read them. On the third day, a journal near the bottom of the second shelf slipped out of her hands when she lifted it. It fell open on the floor. A folded piece of paper slid out from between the pages and landed near her knee. She picked it up. She unfolded it. It was a drawing, a careful pencil sketch of a young woman's face. The woman in the drawing had small, quiet features and eyes that the artist had drawn with a particular attention, shaded so that they seemed to catch the light from a source that wasn't in the picture. Below the sketch, in handwriting that Alara had been reading for 3 days and now recognized immediately as the late Queen's, were 2 sentences. "The true Luna does not come from the high families. She will be found among those who serve, and she will be known by the silver mark that appears on her wrist beneath the full moon." Alara looked at the drawing for a long time. The face in the drawing was her face. She folded the paper carefully and placed it back inside the journal. She closed the journal. She set it in its correct place on the shelf. She picked up her notebook. Her hands were very steady, which surprised her because her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her ears. She went back to work. She told no one. What would she have said? That she had found a drawing of herself in a dead Queen's journal? That it was accompanied by a note about a Luna mark? Alara had no rank, no family name, no history that anyone could trace past the orphanage where she had lived until she was 16. She had nothing that would make anyone take her seriously. And Seraphine was already watching her. The Duchess had said nothing directly. She was too clever for that. But Alara's work rotations had become harder in the days since the ceremony. More floors, earlier starts, the worst assignments in the house. When Alara carried a tray through the main dining room during an evening meal 2 weeks after the ceremony, Seraphine's elbow caught her water pitcher. The water went everywhere. Alara's uniform was soaked. The dining room was full. 60 people watched. Seraphine looked at the spreading water with an expression of mild surprise. "Oh," she said, "I am sorry. You should be more careful." Everyone at the table within hearing distance looked at Alara the way people look at something that has confirmed what they already thought about it. Alara said, "Of course, I apologize." She cleaned up the water. She went to change her uniform. She did not cry, because she had nothing left to cry with, and because she had decided years ago that she would not give certain people the satisfaction of knowing they had reached her. But in the hallway outside the servants' changing room, her friend Mira, small, warm-hearted, perpetually furious on Alara's behalf, grabbed her arm and said, "This is not right. Someone should say something." "Don't," Alara said. "Please, it makes it worse." Mira looked at her for a long moment. "One day," she said, "something is going to happen, and I am going to be extremely happy about it." Alara almost smiled. "Go back to work, Mira." The open moon ceremony happened once a month, on the night of the full moon. The entire pack gathered in the courtyard, and the Alpha's wolf appeared before them, and the bond between ruler and pack was renewed. Servants were allowed to watch from the outer archways if they chose to. Alara had watched every month for 6 years. She stood with Mira in the east archway, near the back, and she watched the courtyard fill with wolves and moonlight. The moon rose. The king's wolf appeared at the center of the courtyard, not a separate animal, but the king himself, changed and luminous, in the old way that only the Alpha could manage in front of the full pack. Silver light moved under his skin. The pack responded to it the way flowers respond to sun, turning toward it without thinking. And then Alara felt something on her wrist. A warmth, a gentle, building warmth on the inside of her left wrist. in the place where a doctor would press 2 fingers to feel a pulse. She looked down. A mark that she had never seen before was glowing on her skin. It was silver white and soft, shaped like a crescent, and it was absolutely unmistakable in the moonlight. Mira made a small, sharp sound and grabbed Ilara's arm. "What is that?" "Nothing," Ilara said. She pulled her sleeve down, but her voice had come out wrong. Too tight, too high. Because she knew what it was. She had read about it 3 days ago, in a dead queen's handwriting. Across the courtyard, the Alpha King's wolf went still, and then it raised its head, not toward the packed rows of nobles, not toward Seraphine, who stood at the very front in ceremonial white, but toward the east archway, toward the servants' entrance, toward Ilara. Every person in the courtyard followed the direction of the Alpha's attention. 60 pairs of eyes turned to the archway. Ilara stood very still in her plain gray uniform and let them look. 3 days later, an unscheduled pack assembly was called. Unscheduled assemblies did not happen. In the entire history of Blackridge Manor, as far as any of the older servants could remember, it had never happened. The announcement went out at breakfast, and by noon, the throne chamber was full. Every noble, every ranked wolf, every family of consequence standing in their places in formal dress. There was a low, constant murmur in the room, and the word that kept passing through it was Luna. Ilara was assigned to stand with the servant staff along the back wall. She was wearing her work uniform because she had not known, until 30 minutes ago, that this was happening. She had not eaten since morning. She stood very straight and kept her eyes forward and tried to breathe normally. The king entered. He did not walk to his throne. He stopped at the center of the chamber floor and stood there, and the room went quiet in a way that felt like a held breath. His beta stood slightly behind him to the left. Elder Roan, the oldest wolf in the pack, was present near the far wall. Ilara noticed him because he was watching her, not the king, with an expression that looked almost like relief. The king spoke without any introduction. "I called this assembly because something needs to be said in front of everyone," and said clearly. His voice was even and calm and carried to every corner of the room without effort. "For 3 years, my wolf has rejected every presented match. Many of you have seen this. Many of you have formed opinions about what it means. I am here to tell you what it means." He paused. Then he turned and looked at the back wall, at the servants, at Ilara. "Ilara Voss, please come forward." The room was so quiet that the sound of her shoes on the stone floor was the only thing anyone could hear as she walked from the back wall to the center of the chamber. She stopped in front of him. She was aware of how she looked. Plain uniform, no jewelry, hair pulled back the way she always wore it for work. She was aware of Seraphine standing 10 feet to her left, absolutely motionless. She looked at the king's face. He was looking at her the same way he had looked at her from across the throne chamber 3 weeks ago. Without pretense, without performance. As though she were the only thing in the room worth being honest about. He reached out and took her left hand gently. He turned her wrist over. He pushed the sleeve up. In the light of the throne chamber, without moonlight, the mark was faint. A pale silver-white crescent, barely visible, but visible. He placed his thumb against it for a moment, and then he looked up at the room. This is the Luna mark of the old bloodline. It was hidden 3 generations ago during a political arrangement that required the true Luna line to disappear from the official records. It survived. It passed quietly through the years, and came here, to this house, in this woman. He looked out at the assembled pack. "Ilara Voss is my true Luna. She will be received as such, by every person in this room, from this moment forward. This is not a request." 5 full seconds of silence. Then Elder Roan, from the far corner, let out a long breath that sounded like a man setting down something very heavy that he had been carrying for a very long time. He said, softly, in the old words of the pack, "The records were true." Seraphine turned and walked out of the chamber. The doors closed behind her. Nobody called after her. Nobody was looking at her. Later, when the chamber had emptied and the evening had gone quiet, Ilara stood in the East Wing library, where she had spent the last 2 weeks cataloging journals. She had come back because it felt like the only place that made sense right now, a room full of old, careful, honest writing, where nobody required anything of her. Elder Roan came and found her there. He brought the original records, thick, old books with careful handwriting inside, and he spread them on the reading table and showed her the entries that traced her grandmother's line, the point where it had been recorded as ended, and the quiet truth underneath that false ending that no one had been permitted to say aloud. She read for a long time, then she looked up at him. "Why didn't anyone find me sooner?" she asked, "if the records were there." He was quiet for a moment. "Records can tell you where a bloodline goes," he said. "They cannot tell you when the bond is ready. The Alpha's wolf has to recognize the Luna. Without that recognition, the records are just old paper." He looked at her with kind, tired eyes. "We were waiting for him to find you." Alara looked at the table full of old books. She thought about 6 years of cold mornings and cold water and marble floors, and a woman's heels walking through her careful work without pausing. She thought about a sketch in a journal and a mark on her wrist that had been there her whole life without her knowing it, waiting for the right light to show it. "I cataloged those journals," she said. "I filed the sketch under undated personal items." Elder Rohn smiled. It was a very old, very warm smile. "I know," he said. "I saw your handwriting in the notebook. You have very neat handwriting." She almost laughed. She did not, quite, but it was close. She found the king standing at the window at the end of the great entrance hall at an hour so early it was almost still night. He was looking out at the pack grounds, where the training yards and old trees and boundary walls all lay quiet in the pre-dawn dark. She had come to this hall to think, because this was where she had always come to think, and she had not expected him to be there. She stopped when she saw him. He turned when he heard her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "I know this was not what you were expecting," he said, "when you came to work this morning 3 weeks ago." It was such a plain, careful way of saying it that something loosened in her chest. "No," she said, "it was not." He was quiet for another moment. "I don't know how to do this well," he said. "I want to be honest with you about that. I know how to run a pack. I know how to make decisions and hold a room and manage difficult people. I do not know how to—" He stopped. He tried again. "I have not let anyone close to me in a long time. I am not sure I remember how it is done." Alara looked at him. This man who had stood in front of 60 people and said her name like it was a certainty, when she had spent 6 years being the person whose name nobody remembered. "I don't know how to be a Luna," she said. "I don't know any of the customs, or the protocols, or what I am supposed to say at ceremonies. I have spent 6 years making sure I was invisible, and now everyone is going to be looking at me." She paused. "I am not sure I know how that is done either." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Then we will both figure it out." Outside, the sky had begun to change. The deepest black was softening at the edges into the dark blue that comes just before gray, and then before light. Alara turned toward the window. She had stood at this window, or near it, hundreds of times. She had watched this sky change hundreds of times, alone, before the work of the day began. This morning, someone was standing beside her. She did not know yet what the days ahead would require. She did not know how the pack would adjust, or how long the discomfort of change would last, or what Seraphine would do with her anger now that it had nowhere left to go inside these walls. There was so much she did not know. But the sky was turning gold at the edge of the world, and the hall was quiet, and for the first time in 6 years, Alara was standing in it, and she was not invisible. That, for now, was enough.